broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Houston, Texas. It's time for Houston Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
Hello, Houston. Trisha Stutzel here, bringing you another episode of Houston Business Radio Beyond the Uniform series. Today's guest is Kevin Ruelas, founder and CEO of RAPTR Analytics, a geospatial intelligence and AI company transforming how law enforcement analyzes complex data. Kevin is a seasoned serial CEO whose career spans global operations, national security, and advanced analytics. Early on, he helped scale a major Middle East contracting operation from 0 to 4 billion in just 6 years, operations across Iraq, Turkey, and Kuwait. He later founded Syndetics, developing cell phone tracking technology now used by U.S. federal agencies. RAPTR Analytics was spun out of that work, an AI-driven SaaS platform that helps law enforcement analyze massive data sets, identify patterns in real time, and turn intelligence into courtroom-ready evidence. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Trisha. I'm happy to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Derek Zoller was the one that introduced the two of us. And by the way, if you haven't seen his podcast, you guys, it dropped December 2nd. So go out and take a look at that. All right, Kevin, before we even get started, I'd love to, if it's okay, just ask you to tell us a little bit more about you.
Sure. Well, I actually grew up in California until I was 12, when my dad, who had retired from the Foreign Service, unretired from the Foreign Service, and we went to live in Honduras and El Salvador and got to start my international life, I guess, at an early age of 12. And then later came back to California and went to school, where I met a bunch of guys playing with this thing called Army ROTC. Decided it was the right choice for me and jumped right in. Became an infantry lieutenant many moons ago. And unfortunately blew out my knee and only served for 6 years in uniform. Had 3 knee surgeries and eventually separated in the early 90s. I went off to do logistics for 10 years in the private sector until the second Gulf War kicked off. And somebody asked me, or a CEO at the time that I was working for, to go to Kuwait and figure out what was going on with the port as it was melting down, as the cargo couldn't get in. So I went over and I started working with a local Kuwaiti company, and eventually they asked me to join them and started a division working on military and logistics and defense work. And to be honest, I worked at that logistics company for about 10 years and was getting really kind of tired of the corporate grind and the growing of a company, growing of a company, but being part of a cog in a company. And the opportunity to start a new company that was focused on military and defense was super exciting and super back to my roots. It really made me understand that I was missing being in uniform. I missed the sense of purpose. I missed being part of that bigger brotherhood. And so leaving that company after 10 years and joining basically a company with no employees, and starting from scratch, as you said, and we scaled. We did, 2 guys, and I had 20, and then I had 200, and then I had 2,000, and I had 20,000. We just kept growing and growing and growing. We're in the right place, right time. I mean, the Gulf War, obviously, right at the beginning in 02. And we're the boots on the ground that needed to be there. And I was supporting, like I said, the military, not just Army, but of course, Navy and Air Force. And we started supporting international partners. We had contracts with UK, France, Japan, etc. And so that's how it scaled, and it grew and it grew and it grew. Unfortunately, I didn't own it. I was working for the Kuwaitis. After a number of years, I took that company global. As you said, it was actually $1.5 billion in revenue, and moved the headquarters to DC. I got kind of frustrated and decided it was time for me to move on. And it was then that I took over another company for another family business, and eventually sold that for them, bought my own company, which you referred to as Syndetics, started another company called Defense and Government Services, and eventually spun out what is now RAPTR Analytics from all of that. And we can get into that again in a minute as I connect the dots for you. But that's kind of how I ended up here after, I guess, 30 years since I was in uniform.
Wow. So, Kevin, you really have led like some of the most complex environments imaginable. How did those early experiences shape the way you think about leadership and risk today?
I think the thing that really stuck with me the most was that rocket ship ride and growing of that company in Kuwait, in that I had to kind of imbue my little cell. Like I said, I literally had 2 guys to start, and then I had 200, and eventually it just kept scaling. But in order to properly lead that organization and make it into what I wanted it to be, I had to really create an ethos, a dedication, and then empower those employees at the time to take what I was trying to create and take it to the next level, and then create another level, and then create another level. And the typical kind of like pyramid hierarchy structure is pretty typical, where it all eventually bubbles up to the top. But you still have to push down through all those layers. 2 reporting to 4, 4 reporting to 8, 8 reporting to 12, whatever the number ends up being, and getting them all to understand what we stood for. And what we stood for was military defense logistics, and that's what our mantra was, and that's what we had everybody kind of rowing in the same direction to do. So the early scaling really taught me how to lead by example, lead through others, and lead all the way to the bottom line, or the bottom of the where the rubber meets the road.
Mm-hmm. It's so important. So how do you think your military experience, I know that's what led you back to do this, was that want or need for the brotherhood that you were missing. But how did your military experience and background really teach you or give you the skills that you needed to get that first rocket ship off the ground?
I definitely think I was actually in a kind of a crux when I got out of the Army. As an infantry officer, a lot of your listeners are ex-military as well, and they can probably relate. Depending on what their MOS or what their branch of the service was, a lot of those have a civilian counterpart. For example, had I been a transportation or logistics officer in the Army, that would have been a natural transition for me to go into transportation and logistics in the civilian sector. Or if I was an MP, a lot of those go into law enforcement, etc. Or I have a cousin who got out of the Navy as a radar technician, so now he works on radar, right? Unfortunately for infantry, there's not that one-for-one. Like, what do you do with infantry? Well, I learned how to shoot guns, and I learned how to shoot mortars and a lot of the security type stuff. So there's that aspect. But more importantly, what I learned most was how to lead troops. I like to say my favorite job ever in the Army was an infantry platoon leader. Those 40 guys, they were my, wake up every morning and go to bed every night team that that's all I thought about. How to lead them, how to motivate them, how to get them to go the extra mile, how to get up at 4 a.m. when I didn't want to get up at 4 a.m., how to do night operations after night operations after night operations when I didn't want to do it either. But you had to lead, you had to motivate, and you had to inspire. And I think it's that aspect that I was able to put into my resume as a, I guess, first lieutenant at the time, getting out of the Army, saying, here's what I bring to the table. I bring leadership, I bring inspirational leadership, and I can motivate. And that's how I got my first job. And I think it was that eventually led me to keep going and become a ever bigger and bigger leader of people. It's going all the way back to that infantry training I had way at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say all of us veterans, we just get stuff done. Sometimes the middle S, I use a different word, but today we'll say stuff. We know how to get out of bed, and we know how to GST.
Yeah. And, you referenced Derek earlier, and I got to give Derek kudos, because he's always been that get it done kind of guy. And that's why we get along so well, because I know if we're on the phone and he says, I'm going to do something, then he's going to go get it done, and vice versa. It's get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely. GST.
Yep.
GST. All right. I want to roll a little forward, if that's okay. And let's really jump into RAPTR Analytics. It was born out of real operational needs, as I mentioned earlier. So, what problem were law enforcement agencies struggling with that really pushed you to spin this out into its own platform?
Yeah, so I actually acquired Synthetics 11 years ago, and was very attracted to it because it's very unique technology. There's no other company in the world that does what Synthetics does, which in a nutshell is find and track cell phones in real time. So Synthetics has devices that we can't get into all the technical aspects of it here, but essentially they're honing in on cellular radio frequencies or cell signals and allowing the operators to track that cell phone to its origin. Over years, we've now gotten to the point where we can integrate that into our mapping systems. Some of the veterans may be familiar with ATAC, for example, where we can put dots on a map now, and we can say, okay, that's where the phone is. If you have two of our trackers where those lines of bearing intersect, that's where the phone target is. And so when I acquired it, and based on my military background, I really focused on my military customers. So special forces, whether they're Army or Navy SEALs, even AFSOC, they all use our equipment to find bad guys. And so that's what I really dove into, because that's what I knew, right? That was the uniform I had worn.
Mhm.
And at the beginning, it was very much hey, law enforcement, if you want some of this, we have this for your use as well. It's military rated. It's used by our brothers in arms on the military side, but you're welcome to use it on law enforcement side. And I didn't really focus on them as a customer initially, but over time, they obviously are a lot bigger in terms of all the police departments around the country. There's 8,000 different police departments, sheriff's departments, agencies, federal agencies. And once you start to aggregate all those, and they're all looking for bad guys too, it starts to become a very large customer set with a little bit different problem where they're prosecuting the people that they're pursuing. They're looking for the legal aspects of what they're doing and making sure it's admissible in a court of law. They're building up a case against somebody who did something wrong, and they need to know, where was the phone last week? Where was it when the crime was committed? Where was it or what other phones were near it when they were doing their bad deeds? So the use case started to shift to not just today's intelligence, go find the bad guy today, but more the historical information that we can derive from cell phones now. So we started working with them to help them get, essentially with a warrant, that data from AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, etc., and get the information that is available from the carriers about the cell phones with their time, date stamps and locations and all these important aspects. But it's a lot of raw data that needs to be analyzed, raw data that needs to be then overlaid over a map, and then start to look for those interdependencies and similarities. And the more we kind of went down this rabbit hole of how do we connect the dots for law enforcement, the more I started to realize, okay, this is a totally different solution. We're not now creating a box to find a phone. We're creating a software solution that is geospatial intelligence. It's looking for dots on a map and looking at them over time, and then looking for inferences and how do they interrelate and what can we glean from all of that. And then the more I started going down that road, the more I started thinking, okay, we need to create a separate company that just focuses on this because it's a different problem. And once I went that way, I also started thinking, as AI became the new buzzword of the day, how do we apply artificial intelligence to this? And the more I started to understand that, the more I realized that, well, what the police are doing is doing the same analysis over and over and over again that a computer can do faster and more efficiently, looking for those inferences, looking for those probabilities, looking for all the dots that connect. That's what artificial intelligence is really all about. So I said, okay, let's create RAPTR Analytics with AI as its base let's get all the data into it from the AT&Ts and Verizons, and then we start adding in Facebook and metadata and all the information that's out there. And then let's start applying artificial intelligence, and RAPTR was born.
Wow. Like, we could sit here for like another hour and talk about all of this stuff. That's so exciting. We're about halfway through our conversation, and I'll bet that people are very interested either in connecting with you or learning more about what it is that you're doing. Where's the best place that folks can go and find out more or read more about the work that you're doing, Kevin?
Definitely, yeah. As most companies, we have the typical www.raptoranalytics.com or raptor-analytics.com. I'm in LinkedIn, of course, and we also have the other companies that I have, which is syndetics.com. I think I'm actually wearing a Syndetic shirt today. Syndetics is where, again, we have the hardware. RAPTR Analytics is on the software. And then my name, Kevin Ruelas, at LinkedIn. All those three are great places to go looking for more information. And all of those websites will have info at, or you can always reach out to me directly. You can say that, I saw you on Trisha's show and I'd like to connect with you. And that would be Ruelas at syndetics.com, Ruelas at raptoranalytics.com. So I'm also, like I said, LinkedIn, where you can connect through there.
Okay, fantastic. And as you guys know, I'll always include the links in the show notes so you guys can point and click if you're sitting in front of your computer. If you aren't, then you'll find probably easiest Kevin Ruelas on LinkedIn. His last name is spelled Ruelas, so that you can find him there. Okay, so Kevin, I want to talk a little bit more about AI because you led to that. The base of RAPTR Analytics is really wrapped around this idea, or this real thing. It's not an idea. This real thing called AI. I'd love to know how that really plays into our law system, accuracy, transparency, accountability. So, how is that working now inside of our law system?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really have to kind of be careful to when I'm explaining how AI is being used for our law enforcement customers, that a lot of the customers and a lot, I guess, the public first go to the movies like Minority Report or some of these other things where like, oh, AI is going to start trying to predict who's a criminal, who's doing bad things. And I have to say, no, time out. We're not doing that. We actually are using it very methodically to look for, as I mentioned earlier, dot connections, or connecting the dots, or look for inferences, or look for similarities. AI is not going to be saying that's the bad guy, or at least my use of AI. So for RAPTR Analytics, what we are creating is I like to think of it as a detective that is going to give suggestions by saying, go look over here. You know what? This actually is a cause for concern because we see a pattern, or we, being AI sees a pattern, or we have seen this pattern enough that we think that there's something that you should go look for further, and allowing the detectives to be the decision makers in the process of what they're going to get more information about, what they're going to dive deeper into. So within RAPTR Analytics, there are color codes of your typical red, yellow, and green, where if something pops up red, you want to go and get more information about what's going on with the red. Yellow, there's some connectivity here. We're not quite sure if that's going to be relevant. And then, of course, green is like 90% of the data is going to be not really relevant to what we're looking at, but that's going to save law enforcement time because they're going to spend those 90% error minutes not wasting their time. So there's that aspect of it. But I say that's kind of the middle tier. There's actually a pre-tier, which is the investigation side, and trying to figure out all of the warrants and the information and getting that data in and out, a lot of that can be automated through artificial intelligence. Where, like I said, you have 8,000 police departments. Each of them are trying to figure out how to do a warrant to AT&T or Verizon or now Tesla and all of the other data vehicles that we can get. All of them can be automated using AI for the warrants, delivering warrants, receiving the warrants, receiving the information. So there's a whole front end of the investigation that can be artificially intelligenced. The middle part of the investigation I was referring to, and then on the back end, which is the court and the admissibility aspect of it, where within RAPTR, we're creating reports, standardized reports where artificial intelligence can pull out data that is court admissible to show charts and graphs and pictures. And by using the computer system to do everything, you're now also having a chain of custody, all these things you hear about on, the FBI files, etc. You're connecting all the dots for the law enforcement customer from the initial investigation through the actual investigation to the courtroom delivery of the information, and all of that can be done within RAPTR Analytics. And all of it as part of artificial intelligence.
Wow. That is amazing. I'm picturing as you're talking through that, in the movies when they've got all the photos and the strings with the tacks in between, like the AI is kind of helping put those strings where they go so that they can go and take a look at all of these other options, right? Based on the data.
I'm going to start using that analogy because everybody's seen one of those boards with the strings and the pictures. I love it.
Yeah, great. Look how good I am.
And I like it.
So thank you. And I love this conversation. It's so it's really interesting. And I think it's also important to know that we're able to use technology in such a way that we're saving time in the law enforcement space, right? Where our first responders can go and do the things, and detectives can go and do the things that they need to do without sitting in front of stacks and stacks and stacks of paperwork, like we see in the old movies.
and you hit the nail on the head. That's the last part of the equation that I didn't really hit on, which is part of our sell to law enforcement is time savings and how much more time they can get back and be out doing police work versus the analysis, report writing, creating the charts and the graphs on the back end, the writing of warrants on the front end, and the analysis in the middle. All of that takes time and energy that law enforcement obviously cannot spare at this juncture.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe a hard question, but just thinking into the future, looking 5 years ahead, how do you see AI and geospatial analytics changing law enforcement and public safety?
Well, I like to think that it will become smarter and it will start to learn more and more. One of the things that we have to be very careful of, again, with chain of custody and court records, etc., is we have to be careful that we're disaggregating the data. That Trisha's phone is this phone number. I don't necessarily need that for all the police departments to know, but they need to know the inferences of what the phones do or what the data does. So we have to be very careful to separate that and make sure artificial intelligence is using only the disassociated data and looking for the inferences and then learning from each other so that LAPD can learn from NYPD, for example. And again, it's not Trisha's phone number, it's the data's intelligence that we're learning off of. So it can get way smarter and it can learn way faster than we can, and it can learn from each other over time. We just have to be careful how we set that groundwork and create those platforms to do it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. I know our time has flown, and I have one more question for you. And it's about the responsibility that comes with this kind of power. So, talk to us about leaders building technology that carries real human consequences, as what we've been talking about here today. What responsibility comes with that kind of power?
Well, I think most people now are very wary of artificial intelligence, or are learning to become very wary and not taking everything that they get out of the computer when you ask Google, Gemini, or ChatGPT, or all these different platforms for an answer. Everybody's starting to understand that you're going to get ghosts. You're going to get references to data that's actually false, or I've seen them, give you, this report says this and that. It's okay, well, tell me more about that report. And that report was actually made up by artificial intelligence. So everybody has to really understand that no matter what, the detective or the analyst needs to be reviewing everything and making sure that there is not a ghost in the machine. There's not something untoward in there, all throughout the process. They can't just press a button and boom, we have the bad guy. I don't think we should ever get there. We need to be, like you said, very wary and be very careful of what the future could bring, so that we don't end up in that Minority Report movie that we were joking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, this has been such an amazing conversation. I appreciate you joining me today. What would you leave? You know that most of my listeners are veterans, and a lot of them are in the entrepreneurship space. What would you leave them with today, just based on your service and the success that you've had in outside of the service?
I like to say that, well, there's a very interesting book that I don't know if you ever heard Chip Connolly describe it as a pyramid or a hierarchy, where at the base you have a job, and then for most people there's a career, and then the pinnacle of it is called is a calling. And I feel like a lot of us who wore the uniform and continue to serve had a calling. And if you can marry your calling with a job or with a company, then you're going to hit it. It's not work, as they say, right? Then you don't feel like you're working every day. You're satisfying your calling and hopefully making some money doing it. And that's all you can hope for.
Yeah, absolutely. What beautiful advice. Kevin, thank you again for being with me today and sharing your time.
Thank you, Tricia. It's been a pleasure.
That's all the time we have for today. If you found value in this conversation, please share it with a fellow veteran entrepreneur or Houston leader ready to grow. And be sure to follow, rate, and review the show. Of course, it helps us reach more bold business minds just like yours. And your business, your leadership, and your legacy are built intentional at a time. So stay inspired, stay focused, and keep building the business and the life you deserve.